All right, and welcome back to another episode of the Indy Investor Pod. We are Indy investors talking Indy investing, and this is the podcast where we just like to talk about anything that's going on here in the city of Indianapolis when it comes to real estate investing. We'll throw in a little tips, we'll throw in some tricks, we'll throw in some real life experience, some of the mistakes we made, and all that stuff along the way. And with that, let's get on with the show. All right, and welcome back to another episode of the Indy Investor Pod. I am excited for my guest here today, Patrick Grayson. How are you doing, my brother?
I'm good. I'm doing great. It's nice and warm, so my bones have thawed out a little bit today.
It's all right. So you'll say that today, but it's gonna be different tomorrow. So
Oh yeah, no, it's literally snow like tomorrow night, I think.
Yeah. So no, awesome. So I'm excited to have you on here and just pick your brain a little bit and talk to you. So I know you're a really well-respected guy here in the city of Indianapolis with what you guys are able to do with your own flips, but then as a just as a project manager, general contractor, all that stuff as well. So yeah, thanks a lot for joining me, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think first off, let's just go ahead and get into a little bit of your background for anybody that maybe might not know you or anything. So kind of what were you doing, and then like how you kind of got into real estate. And I know if anybody knows your dad too, it might just be like, oh, you were probably just supposed to be in real estate in general. But
Yeah, I mean, I always start with that. I was literally born into it, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I was born into a house with some real estate investors, even back to my grandfather. Of course, I had no idea as a child back then, but I grew up, this is obviously many years ago, but I remember people coming to the house to pay rent and stuff like that for my parents' investments. But grew up kind of helping, even as a little kid, probably not much help, but I was on site with dad when he was doing stuff. But high school, college, summer, stuff like that, I was handyman for my parents' business. So I was in and out of all these rentals and stuff. So that's kind of where things started to turn. After school, went to Purdue, got a construction management degree, and spent the next 10 years after college moving around the country with my wife, now wife. Yeah, so we lived in different cities around the country, which was awesome. We traveled a lot because of my job. I was working for one of the world's largest commercial industrial general contractors.
Okay.
So that was really cool, taught me a ton. And then we had our two little boys, Maxwell and Miles, and we figured it was time to get back to the motherland, good old Indiana.
Yeah.
And so, we sat down, figured out our plan, set things in motion, and moved back here to Indiana, which is when we made real estate investing a full-time thing. We had always bought a little property here and there and stuff as we moved around the country, but moving back to Indiana, we just started, I want to say within like 30 days of moving back, bought our first flip house over in Fountain Square, or over in Speedway.
Yeah.
From Amy, your competitor.
Yeah. It's all right. We're all friends. So that's all good.
But yeah, I bought it from her, and it was an awesome project, and it was like just hooked after that. So we kept acquiring some rentals and flips and all that stuff. And I mean, that's the beauty and the challenge of real estate is there's so many different things you can do that we've just started to put our little fingers in all of them. So now we still flip probably 6 or 8 houses a year of our own. We do a little bit of our own marketing now to get those leads. And then the big thing that's kicked off, or not kicked off, but picked up a lot of steam in the last year was our GC business. That's grown by leaps and bounds in the past year and a half. And so, yeah, I mean,
so
this year,
talk about that a little bit of how you kind of went from how you made that decision, or kind of just like where you're like, hey, I'm flipping properties on my own. I can understand this. I have I have some crews. I'm going to go ahead and start doing this for other people now. So
that's it.
No regrets there. It's just like, that's it. Of like, oh, okay. I understand this. I
mean, so what actually like triggered that thought though? Cause that's where it ended up, right? Like I've got the people, I know how to do it. Let's just keep doing it, for other investors. What kicked that off was I just kept getting the feeling it was harder and harder to find like really good deals. So I'm like, instead of laying guys off or not keeping subs busy or whatever, let's let's just keep going for others. So we serve exclusively the real estate investor market. We don't do homeowner type stuff. And we, now I'd say in the last year or so, we've developed this reputation where we do these big old ugly, nasty jobs that other people don't like or can't do, or it scares them off or whatever. So we're doing a lot of like rezoning and variances and permitting and additions and garages and cool stuff like that. So
yeah. And that's the beauty of what you guys do too. Like all the stuff that like I don't want to think about, and I just want to like have somebody like you think about. It's great to be able to hand that off. But I want to kind of go back a little bit of, when you're talking about when you guys were traveling around the US and you were, you had basically your 9-to-5 job of, working, doing just construction in different cities and doing things like that. Can you reflect a little bit on like how much that just impacted and just gave you knowledge and set you up for really what you're doing now?
Oh my gosh. It's, other than school, right?
Yeah.
Like I learned everything from them. So, and it all relates, right? It is a very different industry. I worked for the electrical like division within the company.
Yeah.
So we were building light rails. That was my job. I was a construction manager for that. But all of the systems apply, right? Yeah. You have to have schedules and budgets and contracts and negotiate, and you have to have soft skills like having difficult conversations with people and hiring and firing and all that fun stuff. So it all really translated. And it was almost, that was a job, right? And it was challenging. And then when we went over to the residential world in little old Indiana, it was like, dude, this is fun now. It was kind of fun to do some of those things. And the company's been growing, which has been cool. That comes with its own challenges. But again, like you just roll back to the basics. Why isn't this project going like it should? Well, did we have our schedule on point? Was budget set up right? All that stuff. So,
yeah, I know it's always kind of it's always a hot topic with, I think, just entrepreneurs in general and real estate investors of like, oh, you don't need college and don't go to college. I'd never have my kid go to college, or like, oh no, I need to quit my 9-to-5 job right now and just go ahead and get into flipping. And there's a path for everybody. And I know, like, for me, myself, I was a teacher for 14 years. And honestly, what made me a really good teacher is what makes me a good real estate investor right now. Like it comes back to what you're saying of like, I understand the systems and the processes and how to have those, how to work with people and stuff like that. I might not be able to go out and build a house myself and do that, but I don't need to do that. I hire people like Patrick Grayson to go out and do that for me and stuff. So, but like you said, of like, everybody has a different path. And I think it's important for everybody to know. I think a lot of entrepreneurs get into just like, hey, no, I watched HGTV or my buddy flipped a house and I know I can do it. I'm just going to jump in tomorrow. There's a lot more that goes into it than just like, yep, there's a house. It's distressed. I can fix it and go with it from there. So It's cool to hear kind of what you're saying and just like coming from, a job that and that you still like and you still enjoy and you still follow kind of what's going on with the company. But now it's just like, hey, I'm into something else. But I took it's all about transferable skills and bringing it into what you're doing now. And that's probably why you were able to scale from doing, your own flips into like, hey, I can keep my subs happy. I can keep everybody on point, everybody on schedule. I know the communication with this as well. So, man, that's awesome.
Yeah. Been a wild ride.
Yeah. So let's talk about, so you guys, you lived in other cities and things like that, and you came back to Indianapolis, and you're from Indiana and things, and decided to sit here in Indianapolis and start flipping homes here. What like attracted you to be in Indianapolis and actually flipping homes here with what you're able to do? And then when you have investors come into you now and be like, hey, I'm looking for a project. I want to flip here in Indianapolis, or should I flip in Indianapolis? I'm looking at these other cities. Like, why Indy?
Yeah. Well, you are the Indy Investor Pod. Yeah. So like you ask this question to like everybody that comes on here.
Right.
So I wanted to think of something different, right? Because that's how I am. So my first answer is always this, right? Why is Indy a good investing market? The low-hanging fruit answer is it's boring, right? Like Indy is boring, which means like things are stable and jobs are good and housing prices don't, we're not playing the California up and down game, and like it's just boring, and you can make some good money doing that. So like that's the easy answer. But I have this client that we've done a lot of work for. We've been working with them for almost 2 years ish now.
Mm-hmm.
Older gentleman, and he would always tell me, he's like, I love working in the Midwest because it's a place in the country where a handshake still means something.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's cool. I mean, we obviously always try to operate our business on a level of trust, right? You say you do something, you do it, that sort of thing. And to hear somebody, he's in Arizona, so to hear from him, like, he loves Indiana because he knows if I tell him we're going to do something, we'll do it.
Yeah.
I'm like, that's cool. A little bit of like Midwestern charm still. So.
Yeah. So I like it. And I like that a lot. And I like the fact that you use the word boring too, of like, that's like kind of, when it's not bad. That's not a bad thing when it comes to real estate investing. And it's okay to be boring and kind of be in that role of like, because it comes into the word stable, and that's really what it comes into. And that's what I think of. And when I think of Indianapolis, it's a stable market. And, through all the stuff, especially last year with COVID and things like that, I was worried with, just what was happening with foreclosures and evictions and stuff. But as far as the market, it's like, I think we're going to be okay. Like it's going to be all right. And, I wasn't too worried about it because it's Indianapolis. If I was somewhere else, I would have been completely worried. If I was in Vegas, we wouldn't have been able to have the year like we did. So, So when you're having those conversations about like kind of why Indy and things like that, and you're working with maybe some out-of-state investors, kind of not necessarily just about Indy, but working with a general contractor or a project manager and stuff like that, what's some advice you have when people are, maybe when they're interviewing or finding the right person for their project, but then those things too that like pop up that like investors just never think about, of like, oh, like I'm sitting here on this conversation, you should be asking these questions, but you're not. So I'm just going to tell you anyway. What are some of those things that maybe people don't consider?
All right. And we have 2 more hours to cover this. I have lots of opinions on this. So, and it's because the niche kind of market I'm in personally is both investor and contractor. So like I've been in court on both sides. We've done all the bad stuff and the good stuff and all that. So that's kind of some of the value I think that I bring to our GC clients. I would say that there are 2 things that always kind of surprise me or I don't know, are eye-opening, I guess. And the first one is just how nonchalant investors can be in trusting me with their $100,000 remodel budget.
Yeah.
I mean, they don't ask questions. And they're just like, well, Pat walked it. He said it was $100K. And I'm like, that makes me nervous.
Yeah.
I'm like, no, you need to read the scope and you need to ask questions and make sure I'm covered. Like, so that's always surprising to me.
Yeah.
Just
that's where you're like that handshake's still good, but it's still like, you asked me, probe me a little bit. So
right. And then so then the second kind of more tangible thing is run it like a business. Right? Like this is serious stuff. This is big money. These are, livelihoods at stake, and big things can go wrong. You wouldn't go start, a trucking business or something without having any clue where to start, and you just go buy a semi truck. No, like you do homework and you look online and you listen to podcasts and you figure out what questions to ask, what to look for, how to interview people, stuff like that. So run it. I would encourage your listeners, I guess, to run it like a business, and you don't just hire an employee and tell them to go run the company.
Yeah.
Right. And I mean, that's how some people hire us. And I mean, luckily I kind of know what I'm doing. So they're not in terrible shape, but it's surprising to me sometimes how quick people are to just like jump into it.
Yeah. It's kind of funny so actually I just did like a clubhouse room with Brett Snodgrass this morning on just like, running a business with purpose. And it kind of comes in the same thing of like kind of knowing what your purpose is with real estate investing. What do you want to get out of it? Do you just want to have, like, you just want to pick up one rental a year? Or do you want to do one flip a year? Or do you want to be able to have something that you can scale? And sometimes when you're doing those one-offs and you're like, maybe you don't have a bunch of questions, you don't need a bunch of systems, just like, oh yeah, I got my guy, like he does his thing and it's profitable, I'm okay. But if you're like, hey, I want to do this, like I do want to get out of my 9 to 5, or I want to, I want to make sure I have passive income in 5 years and I need to be able to do this many houses. Like you need to not just rely on Patrick and his company, but you need to have your own systems and your own processes in place and your checks and balances and all that stuff. There's a lot that runs into a wholesaling business and what an entrepreneur needs to be able to do, I think. So, when you, let's talk a little bit about maybe just, kind of, so you talked a little bit, or you said a little bit ago, like, hey, do we have 2 hours to cover this? This might be the section we might need another 2 hours for cover, but like and I'll just say maybe just like one of them, but what's maybe one of the mistakes that you made with your own flips that you kind of learned from, like maybe, right away, you're just like, oh man, I never thought of this. Like, okay, I'm never going to make this again. And then the follow-up question is like, did you ever make that mistake again?
Right.
Because I've said that before and made the same mistake.
Yeah. Oh yeah. That's a great question because so at this point we've remodeled to some degree, like over 150 houses.
Yeah.
Right. So we've seen a lot of different stuff, and those are $50,000 houses all the way up to $600,000 houses. So there's always a lesson to be learned somewhere in there.
Yeah.
Specific to a property, I would say just generally thinking you can outsmart the buyer.
Okay.
Yeah. Like, oh, they're gonna love the fact that it's on this street, so I can get away with a cheaper paint job or something. I fall into that trap often, especially at the end of the job, right? Where it's like, the budget's gone. We still have a punch list. Like, make it work. But I'm gonna twist. So like that's the cheap answer. I'm gonna twist it a little bit, and hopefully this will help like some of your listeners, because I know this little thing made a difference in how I ran my investments, even when it was just me flipping a house or two.
Yeah.
I fell into the same trap, right? Where, how many times have we all heard, don't pay your contractor up front, right? Like we hear this 100 times a day in all the podcasts and everything. And of course, like, what do we all do? We write a $10,000 down payment because we want to be their favorite client or whatever. So one thing that helped me out a lot was actually sitting down one day and I wrote out my own like Pat's rules for investing.
I love it.
And I physically wrote it, right? Not even typed it, like wrote it in my notebook. And it's like, this is how I'm going to run my investments.
Yeah.
And there's something about that, at least for me mentally, I guess, was it's written down now. So like, this is law. And so when the next contractor goes, cool, can I pick up a $5,000 down payment? I'm like, I can't. It's part of the way my business runs.
Yeah.
And like, it's hurt a little bit. I mean, that's a good example. We never write a down payment. And we don't charge down payments on the GC side either. But, we had some contractors leave us. And that's fine. Ultimately they get replaced by people who want to work, and we go off and make money together, and that's fine. But there was a little fallout from it. But I mean, that was a very expensive lesson to learn.
Yeah.
On more than one occasion.
That's good, of being able to put like those kind of like, you said like Pat's rules of, renovation, or Pat's rules of how you're going to operate your business. And like, same thing, like you need to put parameters on things. I know even just as a wholesaler or somebody that's buying and selling properties, that I need to have parameters on like where I'm buying. Cause or like the value I'm buying, I know that like, hey, Brian, don't go out and buy an $800,000 house in Carmel to wholesale. Like, it's not going to work out well. I learned that the hard way. Or no, I don't want to go, going an hour outside of Indianapolis and an hour outside of our comfort zone. Like, it doesn't necessarily make sense. Do I lose deals? Yes. But same thing with you. You might lose some contractors here and there, but no, this is how we run business. This is how we operate. And that's what you need to stick to. So great advice, man. I appreciate that. On some of the stuff for people when they're looking to flip houses here in Indianapolis, what are some of the things that you want to get into, or what they want to look at when they're looking at certain areas or zip codes or neighborhoods or anything like that? What are some of the things that maybe stand out of like, hey, if you're looking to flip, these are the things that you need to pay attention to or look out for, or and honestly, if you can take like maybe some of the good stuff or some of the bad stuff on either side of that.
Yeah. So I don't know the neighborhoods as well as I should. I've listened to your guys' podcast on the neighborhoods like 5 times, but I just don't.
Yeah.
And I'm self-aware. Part of that though is there's a lot of things to evaluate for any new investment, right? Obviously location is a very important part of one thing. You can change that part.
Yeah. And I will say on that too, just like not to cut you off there, but like when we're talking about certain neighborhoods or names, sometimes it doesn't matter really what the name is, because you need to like be out there and like look at what's going on around it is really what it comes down to. So we can say it, we can throw out a name. That doesn't necessarily mean good or bad is what's going to come out of there. So yeah.
Yeah, you're exactly right. But then, I mean, every neighborhood, every part of town, every street has their own deals and what that deal looks like. And it looks different all over the place. This past year, because we were kind of starting off some marketing and all that, I'm trying to figure it out. We targeted like one of the lower income parts of town, and we had a ball over there. Like, I'm buying these super cheap houses. We're doing a mid-grade remodel on it, and then it's in one of those neighborhoods that we actually sell it before it's done to a real estate investor, because it's a 1% rent rate, you know? But I tell people the street that we're buying houses, and they're like, do you carry a gun? I'm like, no.
Right, yeah.
And they're like, why on earth would you buy property over there? I'm like, well, I found a way to make the numbers work. And it fits really well into our business model, and we can turn these properties quickly and all that stuff. So like, it's good for us. Clearly a lot of people don't want to buy rehab projects in that neighborhood, which is great for me.
Right. Yeah.
But like, everybody has their own thing. And even when it comes down to a contractor, right? Not all contractors are good at all jobs. You're going to have some punch list type contractors that can do your inspection repairs and things like that. You'll have some contractors that can really easily do a $20,000 or $30,000 cosmetic rehab. And then you'll have contractors that'll do a 200,000 plus remodel on a Fountain Square house, you know? But those three people are very different. Their pricing is very different. And obviously the skill level. So, you know, I don't have like neighborhoods that I'll stay away from, or that I tend to chase properties or anything like that. I definitely believe that every house has the right numbers that'll work for you. But even at the end of the day, like, I don't buy every house that Simple Wholesaling puts out. And it's just because my buying criteria is different. But you guys sell a ton of houses. So like, there are people with different buying criteria as well.
Which is always funny. That's always a conversation I probably have like once a week. It's just like, man, I didn't see any of your houses that you like. I didn't really like any of your houses the last couple of weeks or last month. I'm like, that's all right. They're gone now anyway. We have some new ones. So, which is always funny. So I want to get back to you kind of talking about doing your own marketing. Cause that's something that I've had a lot of investors reach out to me for, of like, you know, we do a ton of marketing here in Indianapolis and stuff like that. But, you know, some investors themselves that are maybe want to flip or find their own buy and holds, like they're starting to get into a little bit of doing their own marketing. So for you to go from that, of maybe picking up houses from like somebody like me or Amy or somebody like that, to where you're doing your own marketing to find your own deals and things, how did you go about that process of kind of like, hey, well, number one, maybe make that decision, but then number two of like, hey, this is the type of marketing I'm going to do. And here's how I'm going to do
it. Yeah. You're not allowed to steal my secrets. We have an incredibly intricate marketing system and lead generation. No, I was actually just having this conversation this morning with a buddy, and he's like, oh my gosh, what software are you using and who's doing your mail and all this stuff. I'm like, honestly, it started with a friendly bet with some friends of mine here in town, and it was like, next one to get the deal buys lunch or whatever. Yeah. So I went home that night and I hammered out like 3 postcards on Canva that have my caricature on them.
There you go.
And I bought a list, you know, $500-600 on List Source, and just dumped it into Vistaprint. That was awesome. It. Like, that's all we did. So we did that for probably, I don't know, 2 months. So we spent a couple thousand between all of it, and we pulled in three deals off of it.
Nice.
One we wholesaled, the other 2 we ended up doing a quick flip on our own. So that's it. I mean, we've dipped our toe a little bit into the texting stuff, but I haven't seen much return on that. But my whole thing is just like minimum viable product. I mean, you know this well, but by the time you or I walk into Mr. Homeowner's house that he wants to sell, there's a stack of postcards, from me and you and everybody else in town. So like, I think it's timing more than anything, and it's just kind of the luck of the draw, like whose postcard is on the top of the pile when they get in an argument and finally decide to sell or whatever. And I think there's also an element to that good old Midwestern charm.
Yeah.
I put my little picture on there, and literally everybody that I've showed the postcard to chuckles. And I'm like, perfect. Like, that's it. That's good. Like, have a little laugh. But it's been really cool. It's been fun to kick the tires on that a little bit this year. It's obviously paid off financially. But the coolest story there, just quickly, is when I first moved back to Indy years ago, I won a house on one of the real estate auction websites. I was high bidder, but reserve wasn't met. So I ended up meeting the homeowner there, and we tried to negotiate, couldn't cut a deal. This random guy calls me. He got my postcard, a couple months ago, and we're talking. I'm like, your voice sounds so familiar. And I like Googled the property. I'm like, I tried to buy this house 3 years ago. So that was super, ironic and cool. But he never sold the house. I think he ended up going with another wholesaler on it. I couldn't cut the rate. But it's been fun, man.
No, that is cool. And I think it's something that, I always get asked and things, and really the honest answer with a lot of that stuff is just like you said, there's not really like there's not a secret sauce for it. There's no like, there's lists all over the place. You can get them all over, but really what it comes down to is just consistency and kind of knowing your brand, and then having a process to follow up with all the stuff is really what it comes down to with any of that. So it's what it comes down to with a lot of the stuff that we've been talking about today. All right, Patrick, before I get you out of here, I got just one last question for you. And really, it's just, is there one last thing that we haven't talked about today or haven't covered that you just think that like, oh man, hey, this is something I want to throw out there and just like kind of let, anybody that's invested in Indianapolis, maybe they should be aware of or think about, or, anything that comes off the top of your head.
Yeah. Because I'm on both sides, and we've churned through our fair share of contractors, GCs, subcontractors, you name it. I want to encourage all of the investors to remember that this is a relationship, right? The investor and the contractor is a business relationship. And, for whatever reason, I feel like contractors have a bad reputation. And so they get treated that way, like out of the gate. So, use the right attitude, treat them like a team member. Like, you're depending on them, they're depending on you. And there's a lot of money at stake, and there's a lot of stuff that can go wrong, all that. So like, just keep that in mind. That's a really big overarching kind of.
But I mean, and the reality of that is something is going to go wrong. Like they're going to make a mistake somewhere. You're going to make a mistake somewhere. Like it's going to happen, but it's just kind of comes back to, maybe that comes back to like the beginning of how we started, of like, we have past experience that kind of helped us deal with some of those relationships from some of that. And that's what comes through like within our business and stuff like that. And I think maybe some people need to remember that and deal with that. We just had this conversation the other day of, our coach was in here. And so my wife started working within our company, and I need to remember of like, hey, sometimes when I have something wrong with her, I can't treat her like one of the, I need to remember like, hey, treat her like one of the other employees. Cause I probably wouldn't snap at Ronnie the way I might snap at like, hey, you need to do this. But, so it comes back with a contractor too. Is that how are you treating them, and how are you looking at that? And cause people are going to make mistakes. It's going to happen. And you know what, you're probably going to you're going to have another project too. So you want to develop that relationship and cultivate that relationship any way you can. So awesome stuff, brother. Really appreciate you and just all the insights and all the value that you brought today. Is there anything, if somebody wanted to reach out to you, just get some information on you, what you guys are doing, or reach out because they're like, hey man, I got a project, I need a new, GC or contractor for this. How can they get in contact with you?
Yeah. Probably easiest is Facebook. Stolco Designs, STOLCO Designs, and you can do .com. That'll take you to the website, but just Facebook it. I think all my direct contact info is on there. there's videos and all that, so you can kind of see what we're up to, what big, hairy, nasty job we're working on next.
Yeah, you can see the project that your kids are out there working on you with and stuff. So
Yeah.
I love seeing the stuff you're posting, man.
I got my 40-year-old a sweatshirt that says "We buy houses."
I love it. I love it. So good stuff. So thanks a lot, Patrick. Really appreciate you. If you need anything from me, have any questions or any input on what we're doing here on the Indy Investor Pod, or have a suggestion for us on any future shows, you can reach out to me at brian@simplewholesaling.com. I'd be more than happy to help you out with anything you can. But with that, that's a wrap, and we'll see you guys next time on the Indy Investor Pod. Take care.